And for all of these reasons, it's very precious to me. And has been a huge source of inspiration in my own personal prayer and the way that I am in community. So I'm going to say a little bit about the book. How many people have studied in some way Sefer Yetzirah? So bunches of people, right? I wish that I had, this is actually a thing that I forgot, brought a copy of my book, Return to the Place, which I think
Could sell 100 copies.
Huh?
How many own it?
Many of you may also have read Aryeh Kaplan's book, which
Yes.
is how I first was
Yes.
introduced to Sefer Yetzirah. And I'll say a little bit more about the version that I'm working with when we start to work with the actual text. But I want to say a little bit of introduction because this is a book that is so wide understood in so many different ways, and everybody is very convinced of their way. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about my way, just so you understand where I'm coming from, right? And then I hope we'll look at some of the passages together to think about the way that it invites us to explore that inner wilderness, to kind of align ourselves with the creation as the Creator has given it to us, has emanated it to us. And on the way we'll talk about Sfirot and a whole bunch of other things. And also we'll look at a passage in which God has to seal in the different directions the whole cosmos in order to complete it, so that beings can exist in it. So there's a wonderful moment of God becoming a ritual magician that I think is really great. It also has implications, I think, not only for how we do ritual, but for how we encounter the physical world. Wow, I wish I could offer those chairs. You can have mine.
There's chairs in the back.
Someone's got to pull them out, though. Get them ready.
And if people want to feel that's fine. All right. I would love to have one, but I don't see
You get a chair. 10 chairs with limit without end. Eser kisot. Ein sof. Behatsura eser. No measure. And yet there's only 10 of these.
I assume it's not.
I think it'll take up a good deal of my time.
It'll take 10 minutes to move, and then we'll have time.
There you go. There's a holy spot between Ken and me. Is that good? Good for you.
One second.
Ellen, you want to check? Okay.
I'm going to try to speak loudly. Maybe a microphone will come, but if one doesn't come, I'm going to do my best. My voice does not carry well naturally, but I will try my best to be loud so people can hear me.
Zalman used to say, listen louder.
We can't all listen louder. Yeah, it's a complicated universe. Okay. The book of creation, Sefer Yetzirah, may or may not have been mentioned in the Talmud. When was it written? We don't know. By whom was it written? We don't know. Some of the theories. Traditionally, it was written by Abraham, right? And it was dictated, right? Was written by Abraham in response to the experience that he had. Some people think it was written around the time of the destruction of the Second Temple. Some people think it was written in like the 5th, 6th century CE. I happen to be one of those people because it is so similar in its language to the magical literature of that time, including the incantation bowls that some of you might know about,
Yes.
magical devices. Some people think it was written later than that, in the 9th century, and that it has Muslim influence. So, have fun. It's not clear. And also, it is a book that is almost certainly complex. It has, there's good evidence that it has multiple authors incorporated in it that were edited together. And And there are many, many, many different variations on it. It is one of the most widely copied Jewish books of the ancient world, and there are a lot of variations on it. So it's more of a collection of similar books than it is a book.
It is, wow.
But nevertheless, there's still a lot that one can say about what it is saying because it is so beautifully structured and clear in what it is offering, even with these many variations. There's still a lot that comes through for me in a way that's clear. Although I have to say, Moshe Ebel said, anyone who thinks they understand this book is delusional. He said it to me. So I know he was talking to me.
Edel is, yeah.
So, all right, if you go home thinking I'm delusional, it's okay. I'll tell you what I think the book might be. But of course, it is poetry, right? And all poetry can be read in different ways. And I bring my own particular lens as a kind of eco-theologian to the book, and that is a thing that I see. Where was it written? I'm going to guess northern Mesopotamia, right? So Iraq, Syria, and that area. People could put it in Jerusalem or in Alexandria. One of the reasons it's hard to figure out is that it is not like anything else. There's no other Jewish book like Sefer Yetzirah. Nothing is written this way. It's written in short little poems. It's not midrash. It's mostly, there are a few exceptions, but mostly it is not drushing on verses. It's not halakha. It's not even really a story. It's more like a spell.
Yeah.
It has an incantational quality. It begins with an invocation. It ends with a devocation. Right? It interrupts itself to tell the reader to do things. Right? So it's really, and this is, to break the third wall like that is very rare in a Jewish text of that period. So we're dealing with a text that was written by people who were doing something different than most of the literature that we know from this. I think it was probably written out of a community of people who were doing what I'll call mysticism, although I don't always love that word, but I'll call it mysticism. That was inflected both by magic and by meditation. And I think it has a lot to teach us potentially today. And it has a couple of kind of primary myths or images that it has. One of them has to do with the Hebrew letters. That each of the letters in Sefer Yetzirah, each of them represents, or I may not use the word represents, each of them is a channel for a particular kind of being to come into the world. So for example, the Aleph is connected to air, and all things that have to do with air come from the Aleph. But the Mem has to do with water. Right? The Shin has to do with fire. Right? These are the three letters. But each letter has a particular thing, life or wisdom or stars, many things, right? And more than one thing, right? That comes through it. What I think is so extraordinary about this is that Sefer Yetzirah has somehow brilliantly split the difference between Judaism as a text-based tradition and Judaism as a reality-based tradition, a thing-based, right? A this-based tradition. Right? That it takes the letters that have become such a primary piece of Jewish life, right? That by this time, right, it's books that govern Jewish life, right? It's the Torah, it's the Talmud, right? It's books. But Sefer Yetzirah says, but books aren't really books. They're really collections of elements.
Right.
Right? Books are really things, right? Like the text actually is there to give rise to the world. The world is a text. The text is a world. Mm-hmm. For someone living in a time when Jews are so associated with books, to find a text that says, but don't think the book is a book. Right? The book is actually there as an avenue back into the things. This is extraordinary. And I think that it is one particular response to exile. Right? To exile, to galut. Right? That there are many Jewish responses to exile, right, in this time. And Sefer Yetzirah essentially takes this portable book and sort of and it kind of adds water and stirs, kind of turns it back in, like, Rabbi Zalman would say, right? It turns it back into an appreciation for the world. The other primary metaphor of Sefer Yetzirah is also connected to this. It uses language that refers to the temple, often. But in Sefer Yetzirah, the temple is not solely the temple of the building. The temple is the cosmos. And Sefer Yetzirah uses temple language about the cosmos. And I think this is also quite extraordinary. But essentially, Sefer Yetzirah says, we don't need the building solely, right? Well, we can have temple consciousness anywhere we are, because anywhere we are, right, we are in God's creation, and God's creation itself is a temple. And this, to me, feels very relevant and useful today, right? That we could, right, and many of us do, right, think of the cosmos as temple. And it's a little different from the way that the Zohar will later talk about that, right, where there's kind of this world, and then this world's a veil for the other world, right? For Sefer Yetzirah, right, there's nothing veiled about this world. It is the emanation, right, of the letters, right? God's creative intention comes through the letters, right, into the things of this world. And there is no clear delineation, but rather a gradation between God and man. And I'm going to show you passages that I think say this. So there's a lot here for us to mind, right, both as mystics, right, and as people with archaeological consciousness. There's a lot here for us to mind. It's a mysticism invested in the physical, where word and world connect. I also, before we start, have to say something about engraving. Sefer Yetzirah uses the word to engrave frequently. Now, this is partly to evoke the Ten Commandments, right? The engraving of the Ten Commandments, right? That God is hakak, God is engraving the cosmos. But this is a way of saying God, that again, the Torah is not just the Torah is the cosmos, right? And God is engraving not just the stone, but the cosmos itself. There is a way that Sefer Yetzirah is a midrash, both on creation and on creation. But engraving is also important because it's hollow. Right? When you engrave, it's not that you write by putting ink on a page, but you make spaces that then communicate meaning. And that's very important, because for Sefer Yetzirah, these letters are always channels for something to come in, right? And in fact, Sefer Yetzirah has almost no interest in words. But the fact that letters compose words is something that interests the book in a very minor way. Like, it has gone back to these kind of basic elemental principles of letters, right? To suggest that there is a kind of movement through the letters, right, from God to the world. But Sefer Yetzirah, and this becomes a very important point, does believe, or does ask, that human beings also embody this creative principle. And it's not only telling the story of creation so that we should know it, but it is telling the story of creation to empower us in our own creative potential. Right? And how you read that kind of depends on how you read the book. But it often says, God did this, now you try. Now, I don't even know exactly what that means. I mean, I always tell my class, if you can create a golem by the end of the semester, then you get an A, you don't have to. But I don't really think Sefer Yetzirah is really creative. I mean, maybe that too, but I think of it as a book that seeks to align us with the power of God and to align us with creation. And so I hope I'm going to show you some of the pieces where I think it invites us to do that and offers us a very powerful spiritual practice. and I hope we'll have time to get to the Aleph, Men, and Shin, right? These three fundamental elemental qualities of air, water, and fire. One of the interesting dynamics of Sefer Yetzirah that is again quite different from the later Kabbalah is that God, works with the elements in some way in partnership to create the world, and those elements tend to be feminized. Right? So you actually have this sort of interesting dialogue between God and the mothers, right, in order to create the world, which has a lot of mythic resonance for me. And my daughter's bedtime practice when she was little was we would meditate on the three mothers together, and maybe we'll get to do that at the end. All right, so let's look at it a little. Oh, I'm sorry, I have to say one more thing. Another reason why the book is so great for our time is that it is very not particularist, which is weird for a Jewish book. I mean, at that time, it is particularist in the sense that it's using Hebrew as not only a sacred language, but as the divine language. Right? And it refers to customs like Milah. But it doesn't really talk about covenant as being a communal thing. It talks about covenant as being an individual between a person and God, practitioner and God. And other scholars have noted it's really different from other Jewish books in this way, that it really seems to be trying to get at something that is universal, which I think many of us in this time can relate to. Okay, so let's look at some Devarim, right? Which in Sefer Yetzirah, the words and things. Let's look at some of them. So again, I'm sorry that I don't have paper, but I'm going to say the words very slowly, and it's short. I'm going to begin with the invocation. 32 נתיבות פריות חוכמה, חכך יד, י"ה צבאות, ושלוש ספרים, בספר, בספר, בסיפור. Wisdom's 32 marvelous paths, Yah engraved the becoming one who holds many, within 3 books, tome, tally, and tale. So that's my translation, but let me tell you a little bit about what it means. And I should say that this version, the version I used for my book, it's hard to pick a version of Sefer Yetzirah, comes from the scholar A. Peter Hayman, who created what he called the earliest recoverable version. Basically, he went through all the versions and he picked everything that was common to all of them, so that you could be certain it hadn't been added. Right? It's not necessarily the earliest version, but he called it the earliest recoverable version. And that's the version that I use, and it's shorter than some of the ones that you might use. So, for example, there would be more God names in Artie Kaplan's version. 32 marvelous paths, netivot pliot, right? Again, pathways, right? There's always movement in Sefer Yetzirah. So there are 32 pathways, and they are called the pathways of Chokhmah. And Ronit Meroz, the scholar, dwells on this a lot. Chokhmah here is kind of like Shekhinah, in the sense that Chokhmah is the mediating force through which God connects to creation. But Chokhmah isn't so much a personality in the way that Shekhinah is a personality in the Zohar. Chokhmah is more like a web, a network of all of the different paths. So it's almost like there's a sphere through it, and there are all of these holes in the sphere, right, through which these energies can come. And there are 32. Why?
22 and 10.
We're going to get to Spiro, because they're different than one would think. Yes, and 32 is also the heart, right? So we're immediately being directed to the consciousness.
And teeth.
Teeth. 32.
32 teeth.
Oh, okay.
And 32 times, I think, by Yomer is said in the first part of Torah.
Yes.
So there are these 32 pathways, right? God engraved them. And the one name of God that is common in all the versions is Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh-Tselot. That name is always used. Of course, right, because it's the God of multitudes. And that's what Sefer Yetzirah is about. It's like, how does the one get to the many? How did that happen? And how do the many get back to the one? Right, so that tension of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh-Tselot is here in the first passage. But these 32 paths come in categories. They come in the categories of 3 books, and of course they're called books, but they're actually cosmic dimensions. Book, number, and story. Sefer, Sephar, and Seed. And these probably represent the 3 dimensions mentioned later in Sefer Yetzirah, which are Olam, Shana, and Zeh. Right? And really we need a physicist here, because this is really kind of physics. It's right? Space, time, and person. Right? Nefesh is also often translated soul, which I don't prefer to translate it that way because it really means perspective. It means a being, you know, like, and this is like, who spoke about the Tesseract? Yes. It's like a 5-dimensional space, right? It's 3 dimensions in space, 1 dimension in time, or 1 dimension in perspective. So these two, and it's brilliantly expressed here as 3 words with the same root. So it's saying, right, each of these dimensions is the same, right? In some way, it has a common root, right? And yet we experience them differently. Space, time, right? Space goes with book, you can open it. Time with number, because you can count it. And story, of course, with perspective, right? Because you can, right? You can tell, right? You need a perspective to tell a story. So that's our introduction. And from there, the book is going to very carefully lay out. Chapter 1 discusses the spirit. Chapter 2, the mother letters. Chapter 2, the whole 22 letters set. Chapter 3, the mother letters. Chapter 4, the double letters. Chapter 5, the simple letters. And then a final chapter that brings it together. So let me say something about section 2, and I would like to have some more conversation as we get to the next piece. Eser Sfirot Blima. Each chapter in Sefer Yetzirah has a tagline that begins each Mishnah. So you know where you are in the book always. Right? And the tagline for the first chapter, which doesn't appear in the first piece because it's an incantation, right? It's the invocation. Is Eser Sfirot Blima. 10 Sfirot of Blima. 10. Okay. I'll get there in 1 second. 22 Otiot Yisod, which means foundation letters or element letters. 3 mothers, Shalosh Imot. Sheva Kifulot, 7 doubles. Those are like the Kaf and Chaf, the Bet and Bet. And and we have 12 simple letters. Each of these are different categories and they get brushed differently in the structure of Sefer Yetzirah. But I want to say one thing about the so I know that all of you, many of you have thought about the Sfirot. In Sefer Yetzirah, Sfirah really refers to a cosmic dimension in a way that I read it, right? When you read Aryeh Kaplan, he says these are the 10 Sfirot of the Torah. But when they're listed in Sefer Yetzirah, they're listed as the dimensions of space, time, and person. Right? That is the north, south, east, west, up, down, beginning and end, and good and bad. Right? Beginning and end goes with time. Right? The 6 directions go with space. Right? And good and bad is experience. Then there's a second telling of them, where the 6 directions stay the same, and the rest of it is elemental. The Sphirot are water and fire, and divine breath, and liquids, air. And if you look at the later Kabbalists trying to map this onto their 10 Sphirot, they all do it differently. Right? Which to me indicates that they can't do it, right? It doesn't actually matter that well. I mean, it's okay, I mean, it's good, but, but it's not obvious. Because Sefer Yetzirah is working with something else. They're really working with the physical dimensions of the God. They're trying to think about what is the world really made of. And so, those two, these two passages I really think of as, the first one is really the invocation, the second one is the table of contents, right? And then we get into the, the work of the book. All right, so let's look at, I'm gonna skip 1 3. There's, we don't have so much time. I'll go to 1 4. I kind of wish I hadn't done it, but it's okay. And let's read this, and I would love to have some conversation about what you are seeing in these words. So it begins, I would ask somebody else to read, but people don't have, so I think I guess I would just, or maybe Shayla, do you want to read? Should have it? Yeah.
10 inscriptions of the void, 10 and not 9, 10 and not 11. Understand in wisdom, be wise in understanding. Examine them, delve into them, stand each thing on its clarity, on its absence, and return the Creator to their dwelling place.
You would sit with this for 100 years. Right? I actually think that's what you're supposed to do. Right, so before I start talking, what are some things that you see here? What are some things that strike you about this passage?
This 10 and not 9, 10 and not 11. It doesn't have to say that, it could just tell us it's 10. So
Yes.
there's something happening there.
What's going on, right? Why, right? The Sefer Yisrael always has many reasons why it's doing something, right? So why mention something that we should know, right? We know 10 is 9. Yeah, right.
The second line is a feedback loop.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's there's an infinity, exactly. Right? Chaben b'chokhmah, v'chachem b'bina. Right? It's like it's directing you in an infinite loop, right? To be wise and understanding wisdom, be wise and understanding. So there's a kind of going back and forth, right? And Kaplan actually sees this as a way of connecting chokhmah and bina. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think like the last two lines is bringing it back, all the movement back to a still center, or to a center, at least the Hashem Yochar will know.
Yes.
So
Right. Yeah, and that's also very typical of Sefer Yetzirah, is that polarities are always resolved into a sacred center. Like it's almost never left as a polarity. It's always resolved by the center.
Dialectic.
What else?
Yeah, something wrong has happened and the Creator is out of their dwelling place and they need us to return them there.
Yeah, like who knew that? Like I'm supposed to return the Creator to the dwelling place? Right. So suddenly we're involved in a way that perhaps we didn't know we were involved. Right. What does it mean, right, to say in the imperative, right, return the Creator, right, to her their dwelling place? Right. What does that mean? And this in some way is the root of the later Kabbalistic notion that humans have an impact, right, on the Godhead. We see it right here. Yeah, absolutely. What else, please?
Well, it sounds like the understanding and the wisdom gained when you immerse yourself in the experience of the Sphirot, that's what's going to help bring the Creator back to the dwelling place. So really embodying it, and that's going to move it forward.
I love that. I think sort of consciously embodying this wisdom is a way to make the return happen. love that. What's ironic is they're telling us this before they even tell us what the Sefirot are. It's like, before we trust you with these things, like, we actually need you to understand what to do with your brain.
So I just was thinking about what you said about the two polarities coming into the center and how it's all about the dialectic, and then I was just thinking about if we read this piece the way we read biblical poetry, as that it's a set of parallel sticks. And then, first of all, you have the Sefirot, which are like the manifestation. That's the Blima, is the without what. It's the nothingness is the all that is. And then you have the 9 and the 11, which centers into the 10. And then you have the Chachma and the Bina, which centers into the middle pillar. And then you have I don't know what to do with the middle part. That's two different kinds of searching. That's, you got some kind of parallels there. And then you have this one that's like standing the matter on the absence, and the creator, which is maybe the opposite of the matter, or the parallel of the matter on the most solid thing. It's just very interesting, like if you read them all layered on top of each other.
Yes,
Can you
yes.
explain how you get absence?
Yeah. So, the Hamed Devar al Buryo, right, is a Talmudic phrase. Now, some Sadi Weiss thinks that the Sefer Yetzirah writers never read the Talmud. I don't think so. But this is a Talmudic phrase, Hamed Devar al Buryo, which means to stand each thing on its clarity, which means to get it all worked out. But a bore is a pit, and it is a word for an absence. So I translated it.
A word for a what?
Bore can mean an absence of something, a void, right? So, and that void is embedded in Boryo. So stand each thing on its clarity, right? You could also read it. Actually, the first time I read it, I did read it as stand each thing on its pit, right? And I think there's a pun happening in the language, because remember, Sefer Yetzirah is always interested in what's hollow. Right. Right. So if everything is hollow, right, then for me to get reality worked out, I have to understand that there is an absence under the presence. Right. Somebody is.
That's the Makan.
It sounds like you said before, it's got poetry to it, and it sounds to me like this is like a magical spell.
You said it. Absolutely. I really do.
I feel like there's
And the Jewish texts that are most similar to this are the incantation books. They are the most similar to this of any other, Jewish text. Yes.
So, it's a question for you, Jill. How do you understand the interplay between Blima, or even that understanding of Boyo as absence, with Machon? With the Machon, which
yes.
In some ways, if not solidity, at least stability, and how do you play with that?
Yeah. So I'll say two things about it. First, I want to go back to the idea of Esther Sefirot Blima.
Oh, sorry.
No, this is actually an answer to your question. I'm getting there. So Sefirot, right, can be translated as spheres, right? People connect it to sapphire, right? It's this kind of wild word. The translation that actually speaks to me is by a scholar named Giulio Busi, who says it means inscription. Like Sefer, it is used that way at least once in the Babylonian Talmud to mean inscription. That these are God's principles that are inscribed into the cosmos, and they are hollow. Sefer Yetzirah always treats the Sefirot as hollow, right? So inscriptions, and Blima can mean without what, as in they are insubstantial. Right? Blima, without what, right? Without matter. But Blima also means to stop up. Like they are inexpressible, you can't talk about them. Right? So there is always this sort of dialectic between the thing and what's under the thing, which is really, I think I would use the word energy. That the mechon, right, when we return God to God's dwelling place. So where is that? Right? We're supposed to return God to God's mechon. Where is that? Right? Right? Say, right, if I'm the one who can do it, then maybe that's what it is, right? Maybe that God has to be returned within the body, right, within the self, right? Or we might say God's mechon is at the center of the cosmos, except if the cosmos is infinite, which Sefer Yetzirah says it is, then it's always expanding. So everywhere is the center. So wherever you are, right, is the place of God's mechon.
So, so many questions. First of all, it just looks like there's like a progression between, there's like 4 verbs of understanding, and then you have like 2 verbs of action. And it seems to get closer, more and more action, until you finally get Hashem, into like return. I'm just also wondering, I know that it doesn't have an aleph in it, but the fact that it talks about Yotzer, is that, I don't know if the Sefer plays around with it because it's like Borei, as in Bria and Yotzer, but I don't know if that's there because it's not an aleph.
I'm not sure, but it could be, because, I mean, part of the amazing brilliance of this text is that, like good poetry, it says many things with one word. Like, you can read it and you come, and I can't believe everything got squeezed into this, this 2-word phrase. Yeah, thank you.
But you also have the singular, but you translated there.
Yeah, I did that for gender reasons. It's not actually plural.
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry. I couldn't figure out how to do it. And gender really is interesting in Sefer Yetzirah because the Creator stays masculine in terms of verbs, but pronouns are almost never used.
So why Yotzer rather than the Creator? Why not? You got the former, the person who's doing formation, as opposed to the ultimate creation. First there's creation, and then there's formation.
Yeah. Since I think this text is pre-Kabbalah, right? I'm not actually sort of in the mindset of the 4 worlds, right? Because Sefer Yetzirah doesn't talk about the 4 worlds, right? So that's that's part of why I think that they actually really mean the creation when they say Yetzer, but they're using that word particularly because it is a word that is used for an artisan, right?
Yeah.
And God is always being described as the artisan in Sefer Yetzirah. Yeah. So right, former would absolutely be right too. All right, you ready for another one? Esther Spirot Berima. Blum Picha Miledaber, Blum Libcha Mileharher. Ve'imratz Libcha Shuv Lamakom. Shekach Ne'emar V'sol V'shol V'al Devar Zeh Nichlach. 10 inscriptions of the word. Stop your mouth from speaking, stop your heart from murmuring, and if your heart runs, return to the place. For Scripture says running and returning. Regarding this matter, a covenant is made. I first want to note that all of this is in the imperative. This is addressed entirely to the youth. Right, so it's like a ritual is unfolding, you're getting the instruction on what to do.
So I don't remember if you were just like, how was this read? I mean, did people read this together? Did they read it individually?
We don't know. We don't know
how it was used.
What we know is that commentators began writing about it, right? And that's how we have these versions, right? Is that commentators like Saadia Gaon began writing about it. But it's a mystery. We actually have no idea how this text was used when it was first created. It's somebody, right, in the Jewish world got hold of it and started disseminating it. And eventually, really, in some ways, Rabbinic Judaism began taming it. They were like, oh, it's a book of philosophy. Well, it is a book of philosophy. Wow. But it's not only a book of philosophy, right? It's a book of linguistics. It's about the alphabet. So we don't really know, and I imagine it actually being transmitted in a kind of ritually way.
Yes.
Right, like from one person reciting, right, for a community that's then working in the practices. That's how I imagine that it was used, but we don't really know that.
Is it the origin of the Yotzer V'Shov metaphor, or
No. I'm going to talk about it in 1 second, I promise.
Could you talk about Mechono in 4 and Lamakom in 5?
Yeah. I think that they're being used in similar ways, and yes, I will say something about it. All right, so let me start with let me start from the beginning, and we'll get to these things. So first of all, stop your mouth from speaking. So remember blima? Bloom, right? It's the poetic resonance of those things, right? Don't express, right? Don't try to verbalize. And heart, right, means consciousness, right? In this time period, it doesn't just mean the feelings, it means the consciousness. So this is like basic meditation instruction, right? Sort of stop investing in your inner monologue. Right? Stop talking, right? And stop ruminating. The hair means to obsess. Like when Abraham had hirurim, it's like he was worried about something, he couldn't stop thinking about it, right? Hirurim are obsessive thoughts. Stop obsessing. Right? Stop the perseverating. Yes. But of course we know that that's actually very hard, if not impossible. Certainly is for me. So if your heart runs, really when your heart runs, but if your heart runs, right, if you find that there is this move, this inner monologue happening, right, like Buddhists would call monkey mind, return to the place, right? Come back to, right, go back to the place. Now, what is the place? What place are we returning to?
Could you say that phrase in Hebrew again?
Yes. Ve'im ratz libcha, shuv lamakom. Makom. Right. So of course, right, rabbinically speaking, makom is God. Right. So return to God. But what else could makom be? Your center.
Sacred, or the circle of the ritual.
Right. Return to the actual
ritual place.
The ritual. Right. The temple.
Present moment.
The present moment.
The body.
The body.
Where you were before.
Wherever you were before. Come back to it. Together, right? All of this is packed into the word makom. And right, the kiyum is the cosmos, right? Like makom is is what exists, right? That which exists is makom, the place. And it's connected to mechom, right? Mechom, as Elisha said, is God's dwelling, right? But this makom, both words get used for temple, right? Hamakom asher yukar Hashem, the place that God wishes, right? Makom l'shivtecha, right? The place that you will dwell, right? All of these things, right, are packed into this word. So when you come back to the place, which is here, you're also coming back to makom as in the temple, right? So this is an individual practice with cosmic implications.
If this is a meditation text, do you need to say this is a reference to a physical place? Or we all know that meditation is a constant return. Constant thoughts come, you let them go, and you're back to emptiness, nothingness.
I think what I would say is that meditation requires the mind. Right? It actually requires the place. Right? The meditation, right?
Nice.
Right? It requires olam shana and nefesh. Right? So we might think of that as embodied or we might not, but it is embodied. Right? And Sacred Yitzhak, I think, knows that. But I wouldn't press the point if you don't want to think of it that way. I think that the principle still stands, right? Which is that it's about the return, right? And that's what the practice is the return. Yeah, I want to get to Breeze, but yeah, Jeremy, go ahead.
Oh, one of the things that really was breathtaking to me was Ratzo V'Shov.
Yes.
Because when I read that in the Ezekiel, it doesn't mean, as a meditator, I'm familiar with the idea of my heart running and you have to kind of come back and recenter and it's that give and take. But to the idea that process is what the angels are doing or what the divine beings are doing was totally breathtaking.
Yeah, it's amazing. Thank you. I was just about to go there. Thank you.
Got time to meditate.
This is one of the few places where Sefer Yetzirah has a proof text. And it gives a proof text. It's like meditation needs a proof text, right? But it gives a proof text, right? With Sova Shov, which is two words that are pulled from the first chapter of Ezekiel, right? Where either the angelic charioteer, chariot beings, or the divine presence itself right, is doing this action called Ritzova Shov, going back and forth. Give me a second, I'm coming. And this back and forthness, I think, has two qualities that I can see in it. One is Ritzova Shov is in the mind going back and forth, right? Where it's, I run, right? My mind runs, like Ratzilcha, right? And then it returns, right? I pull it back, I return. But it also is Ritzova Shov, as in Ritzova Shov between me and the Creator, right? That is, right? I run right to my, my separate self, right? And then I return right to my connection to the Creator, and that is the, what the paths of wisdom make possible, right? Is that returning, and it's that connection that is called the Brit, right? It's that if I am returning, then God will be returning, right? Then this feedback loop will continue to happen, right? That is the Brit, and I think that is an incredibly radical expression of what Brit could mean.
Did Ezekiel borrow from Sefer Yetzirah?
No. I mean, if you want to think that Sefer Yetzirah was written at the dawn of creation, but right, no, this is being drawn from Ezekiel, and I love the idea that this means that what the angels are doing is meditating, right? But it takes this language of primary revelation, right? Like this, Ezekiel's moment of seeing. This is how the cosmos is. It says this is happening inside our minds all the time, right? And all we have to do is sort of keep returning, right? Which just sort of feels intuitively right? If you meditate.
The relationship between Chachma and Bina.
You can see it that way,
Yeah.
and then Kaplan does talk about it. Absolutely.
I've always seen it as energetics, protons, neutrons, electrons moving very fast. The Dalai Lama has a great lecture on energetics happening all the time, and there's blima, there's nothing there. But it's all energetics, and our meditative practice can match that consciousness of primordial nanotechnology energetics. And I think they had a prescience of that in those days, where they were tuned into it in some profound way.
Yeah, I have to say I agree. I always am pulling myself back from saying they understood, they knew about quantum physics. I can't really assert that.
No.
But I do feel it.
Right.
Like the language is so on point.
Right. That's
that
what,
I feel
exactly.
it. Yeah. Amazing.
Rabbi Jill?
Yes.
I just want to comment that we often think about the angels going up and coming down on Jacob's ladder, and we refer to that as the spinal column, and we're on the spinal column, and it is true that the spinal fluid is constantly washing over your brain, coming back and washing over your brain. So it's like we had a pre-scientific model,
there you go.
if you will, that you can feel moving in your body. So I just want to point that out.
I
Nice.
love that. Thank you so much. Really, really
That's
good.
nice.
Yes. Wow.
It's just great.
All right, so we have one more of these before we can know what the Sefirot are. Let's do one more, and then we can actually grab the Sefirot. All right, so this is 1/6. Who has a? Who is a loud voice who is willing to read? Thank you.
Do you want the Hebrew?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tanima.
Both of you, if you feel comfortable.
Aser Sfirat Blima, Na'ut Sofan B'Tchilatan, U'Tchilatan B'Sofan, Kishalhevet B'Gachelet, Shehayotzer Echad, Ve'en Lo Sheni, Ve'lifnei Echad Ma Tasofer. 10 inscriptions of the void. Their end is embedded in their beginning, and their beginning in their end, like a flame in a fiery coal. But the Creator is one and has no second. And before one, what are you counting?
Very good. That's so Tanima.
I love this. I love it. I could sit with this forever, and if I were to make a cross-cultural comparison, I would say this is like a koan. This is like the kind of statement that is supposed to crack your mind open, because you cannot really encompass it in your brain. So it starts with our 10, right? Esther Sfirot Lima, right? 10 inscriptions of the Lord. And again, we have one of these happening in the language, right? Their end is embedded in their beginning, and their beginning in their end. So, right. So what could that mean, right? So it could be.
An infinity loop?
Right,
Is that what you're making?
Right, it could be an infinity loop, right? It could be that the Sfirot, each one is embedded in the next, so we're getting a kind of circle. But I tend to read this as their end is embedded in their beginning, as in the Sfirot are embedded in the divine. Right? They come from the divine, and they are embedded there. Right? And they're beginning in their end. The divine is embedded in them.
Mm-hmm.
So even though the Sfirot are in fact dimensions of the physical universe, right, they are embedded in their creator. Right? They are, right? So Sefer Yetzirah, I think, is proposing an immanent view of the divine, in which there is no clear moment when you can say that's God and that isn't. Right? The Sfirot become physical, but they are embedded always in their origin, and their origin is embedded in them. And they give an image. Sefer Yetzirah is very reliant on images. It's a book that, although it speaks in words, is always trying to convey images. And the image is like a flame and a fiery coal. So if you have a coal and a flame, they look totally different. But in fact, they're completely inseparable. And the flame goes through the coal, right? You couldn't find exactly the point where the coal ends and the flame begins, right? The flame permeates the coal. And so that's the image that Sefer Yetzirah uses. Right? And you could say the coal is God and the flame comes, right, is the world, or vice versa, right? The world is the coal and the flame is God infusing it. Right? But the image, suggests the complete intertwining of those phenomena. And then it says this mind-blowing thing. Shahayotzer echad ve'en lo sheni. All right, so this sounds on its surface like a basic Jewish statement. Right? There's one creator who has no second.
I'm so
Right.
about
But it sounds in this context more like there's one creator and there isn't anything second. Because the next line is V'lifnei echad, and before the one. And before here can either mean before in time. Right? Not so fair. What are you counting? As in, if you were really in non-dual consciousness, would you need the number one? Right? If you're thinking the number one, you are already in the consciousness of Kemal, right? Of multiplicity, of separation. Right? If you weren't in that place, you wouldn't need the number one. Right? So before the one, right? Ma'ata sofer, right? There's no counting in that place. Say again?
Oh, I'm playing with math again. Our system is called base 10, but we don't have a digit of 10. It's just the next one up and nothing. So God is base 1 or base 0.
Base 0. I wonder if there's an implication to read it that chiastically.
Yeah.
What does that
Yeah.
mean? Say more? What does that mean?
Well, I mean, if you take the Hebrew and you start and you can continue it from Lifnei Echad, and then you go Ve'en Lo Sheni, and then you go Kuhaya. So you read each sentence in backwards. You end up in the beginning, and then you end up in the same way. Am I being clear or no? No. Okay, well, I'll let it go.
All right. I afterwards I'd love to hear.
Tamina taught about this.
Sure.
So this piece makes me think of like the Ouroboros, the
Uh-huh.
Telly, which is mentioned later on, where the end is in the beginning.
Right.
Yes. And also the line from the Chadodi,
Sof Ma'aseh v'Naf Shabbat
Sof Ma'aseh v'Naf Shabbat Tefillah. So it's like
yes.
the ongoing continuity, like the flame and the coal.
Right. And I do think the whole investment in emanation, right, that we see in the Kabbalah, right, is partly coming from this place, this sense of oh, it doesn't have to, it's a model in which God is forming things like an artist, but God is also kind of, emanating things, birthing things. Things are extruding from the divine in a way that seems much more organic.
Right.
So there's sort of both models sitting next to one another of the divine artist, right? And there's something that's happening that has something much more organic. All right. So before one, what are you counting? Right. And I love that. So fair, of course, is also the word for sphirot. So it's like what are the sphirot? Is there a sphira? Is that even real? Right? Or is it only an illusion? Right? And right, it's only the echad. Amazing. All right. So now I think we're ready for the sphirot. Maybe. I have to say, the first time I ever taught Sefer Yetzirah in public, I passed out on a bima.
Sit down.
I don't know. That's really a good question. But this text is very, there's a lot going on. All right, here it is. Eser Sfirot Bima. Uvidatan Eser she'ein lahem sof. There are 10, but they're all infinite. They have no end. So it's right there, discrete, but infinite. 10 infinities. Omek Reshit va'omek Acharit. Omek Tov va'omek Ra. Omek Rom va'omek Tachat. Omek Mizrach va'omek Ma'arav. Omek Tzafon va'omek Darom. Va'adon Yachid el Melech Ne'eman, Moshel b'chulam, Miba'on Kodsho va'ad Adei. 10 inscriptions of the void, their measure is 10, yet they are infinite. A depth of beginning and a depth of end. A depth of good and a depth of evil. A depth of above and a depth of below. A depth of east and a depth of west. A depth of north and a depth of south. And a singular master, a faithful divine ruler, rules over them all. God's holy dwelling. Out to eternity. Do you hear the ritual in it?
Oh, yeah.
It's like it's happening as you read it.
Yeah.
So what do you notice about the depths? And I'd love to actually, there are people in the room who haven't spoken at all yet. I would love to hear from those who haven't spoken. Yeah, things they want to share. Okay, you go.
Well, it seems like it's adding a dimension to these spaces. So if you're taking east, but then if you have a depth, then it's a whole other dimension for it. It's not just a direction, it's something else.
So it's not just a sort of theoretical direction, but we're actually being shown the whole complex, right? And each spira is really half of, right, an infinite dimension, right? That that goes in both directions, and you need both of those spheroids to make it. So I love your suggestion that there's real depth, that there's a sense of dimensionality. What else?
Also, we've had this, the beginning is embedded in the end, or was it the end is embedded in the beginning? Both. So it feels to me like now we're going deeper with that. Well, what does that mean? And perhaps it's related somehow to the depth of good, the depth of evil, the depth of all of these directions. There's this, I feel like it's holographic in a way, or like it's like fractals.
Yes. Yeah. And we're going to see that people and the world are related to one another. The way the elements are constructed in us is similar to the way the elements are constructed in the world. So that has a fractal quality as well. Thank you.
Each 10 appear to have 10 measurements that are actually infiniteness.
Yes.
Because there's 10 of these descriptions, presumably that apply to all 10 of them.
What is the power of the word omek?
Yeah.
What's it doing? There's magic in that, interweaving it into all of this.
That's not the same word as from this morning you were talking about the deeps.
It's not the same word, but it may be the same feeling, right? Because an omic can also mean a foundation of a building, right? So these are also the foundations of the temple that is the cosmos, right? Or the omic, and they're hollow at depth. Is that where you're going?
Yeah, I was going with hollow, hollowing out. The other thing I was thinking about is the letters. Because if you're from guttural and then the mem on the mouth is like, kind of going out.
It's fun to say.
The body.
It's fun to say. And Sefer Yetzirah is always working with sound, right? The structure is always as important as the words. So thank you for alerting us to that repetition, right? That there's a sense of this hollowing out, that the world's getting bigger, right? With each of these dimensions, right? The world's getting bigger.
Is there an obvious connection with lulav?
Yes.
Next,
Yes. Right. All right. So, right, lulav we wave in 6 directions, but it used to be that all offerings were waved in the directions, right? But lulav is the one that we still do, right? But so this alluding to the directions, what Sefer Yetzirah does multiple times in multiple ways. It's a language for the whole. Right? When you have a language of the 4 directions or the 6 directions, it's a language for the whole. Right? That there's a diversity that together constructs a complete system. And that's part of why it has this kind of magical sound, right? Is that it often is invoking the elements of the directions as a way of invoking the entirety of the cosmos.
Well, waving the Levites. Didn't the Levites, they waved the Levites?
Yes.
They got waved too. This is like,
the honey.
wow, well.
It's one way to be ordained if somebody can wave you.
Waive all other requirements.
One letter, yeah. Wave, W-A-I-V-E.
Yeah,
That's
so
great.
like Olam Shana Nefesh, and so I see all 3 of these in this Mishnah, right? Because it says Reshit Acharit, that's Shana, that's time.
That's right.
Right, Tov V'Ra, so that's going to be Nefesh, and then we have the Olam, which is.
Right. And again, it's all resolved in the center, right? In the Adon
What's the third? What's Nefesh?
Nefesh is.
No, I mean in this.
It's Tov and Ra, because human beings do experience good and bad.
And I'm burning with this question. How do you see the use of the word ne'eman in this?
Yeah. The word ne'eman. And I think they see it as reliable in the sense that God is building a structure that can be relied on.
Balance?
Something like that. Balance is nice. Yeah,
True dad.
Something like that.
Yeah, so some of what was just said relates to what I was going to ask, which is, given that we're talking about Sphirot, how is the Yetzis Sphirah understanding Tov and Ra in this context? And so is it about the totality of experience as opposed to the polarity of Tov and Ra the way we usually do it?
I think that when I get to this, I remember that Sefer Yetzirah is a poem, and there's multiple things happening here. Right, this is Tov and Ra as in Adam and Chava's Tov and Ra. Like, this is like consciousness of everything. It's also Tov and Ra as in good and evil, as in moral awareness. But it's also Tov and Ra as in simple experience. Right, as a human being, right, I have experiences that I like and experiences that I don't like. Right, and if I wasn't a being, I wouldn't have opinions, right? So it also is experiential. You want to say something?
I'm also thinking about Tov V'Ra, because we're talking about some kind of infinite spectrum in all of these. So there's some kind of axis of Tov and Ra that goes infinitely.
Yes.
And I'm wondering if about Vayar Elohim Ki Tov, if there's something about Tov and Ra in the sense of, I don't know, fulfillment or manifestation or something, some kind of continuum from idea to fulfillment or something. I don't know.
That's how I was trying to read Nehemiah. That the continuum exists constantly, faithfully, reliably.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Right, yeah.
I want to say one more thing about Tov and Ra, which is, and I think that this is also unusual, that except in a couple of passages, Sefer Yetzirah does not really focus on the ethical realm. It really is focused on the realm of creation. And when it does focus on the ethical realm, and this is mostly in chapter 6, it seems to assume that Tov and Ra are essential and necessary parts of creation, right? And the job of the human heart, right, is to be sorting through it and sort of in that, and it actually uses the word milchama, sort of in that battle. But nowhere in Sefer Yetzirah is Ra something that was introduced by accident, right, or by some malevolent entity. Right? They are like north and south. It's part of the deal.
Both are required.
So I think it's resonant with that. So it's a really
Isaiah, Yotzer.
Right, like Isaiah, yes.
Which they change.
Lots of people
euphemize. I'm just wondering if there's kind of a Ratzon between 6 and 7. Because 6 feels like it's strictly non-dual.
Folks, I'm so sorry, I can't hear.
It feels like 6 is kind of more strictly non-dualist. It's like the end is in the beginning, like God is in the world is in God, and then 7 goes into this little bit more of a separation in terms of its God is ruling from the place, which seems to be a little bit separate. So I'm just wondering if that's...
Yeah, well, the only thing I would say about the end being separate, and I do think that there is variations in the language of the kind that you're talking about. Mima'on kodsho ve'ad adei ad. So there's 3 ads, there's 3 eternities, space, time, and being, right? So the language is again bringing us back here. So if ad adei ad is those 3 dimensions, right? Then in order for God to rule from the center in an infinite plane, God has to be everywhere. Or specifically everywhere, not sort of in some generalized way, but specifically God has to be everywhere and everywhere. So although the language in one way is more hierarchical, I also tend to read it as a reaffirmation, right, of the God in the present, that I think Sefer Yetzirah is inviting us to access. And it ends with Ad Adei Ad, actually. All right, yeah.
That's kind of where I was going also, back to Dimension Land. The north and the south could be like the x-axis. And the first dimension, and the east and west is the second dimension, and the y-axis, the z-axis, the up and down. That gives us 3 dimensions. Beginning to end, that's the dimension of time, which we experience linearly because we don't know how to view this, but the beginning and the end are another dimension. And then good and bad, or whatever Tov and Ra can be taken to mean here, are another dimension beyond time that is...
That's what the Upanishads say.
Consciousness.
Right in
This is
the
a
meaningful.
5-dimensional model.
Yes, that's exactly it. And I've had students try to build it, it's but you can't really build it, right? You can't really build it in 5 dimensions. I'm really torn. I want to teach you about the ceiling, but I also feel like we have to do some practice before we close. I don't know what to do. All right, I'm going to do the ceiling quickly, and then we're going to do some practice. So I just want you to see this. This is from 113. It's a little bit of a skip, but I just want you to know that this is here. After this telling of the Sefirot, Sefer Yetzirah does count down the Sefirot again, the 4 elements, except not earth. In Sefer Yetzirah, earth is not an element, it's a subcategory of water. And then it counts down to 6 directions again. And in this sort of final ritual of this chapter, God basically stands in the middle of the cosmos, turns to the 6 directions, and seals each one with a different combination of Yud, Vav, and He. Right? If you take the 3 letters Yud, Vav, and He, and you combine them, right, you can get 6 unique combinations. And each of those combinations goes in a different, right, in a different place. And essentially, God completes the cosmos, and then puts a chatimah, which either means to sort of seal it, to kind of solidify it, like this is the thing, this is how it will be, right? And also to protect it, right? You see the language of sealing a lot in Jewish magic of this time, right? That a house can be sealed,
and then
right? Right from the from negative forces and all that.
And in our prayer service, we
Yes.
always put a
Yes.
Hatimah at the
Hatimah,
end of,
there you go.
at the end of the section
Nice.
of prayer.
Nice.
Yeah.
So in a sense, God becomes the ritualist. So I want to take a moment with this book to do a little bit of practice. And I want to work with the dimensions of space and time. So you're invited to be in whatever meditative posture works for you. And I invite you to begin by locating yourself in space. And if you want, you can actually take a moment to notice the 6 directions around you. If you don't know where the points of the compass are, don't worry. They can be before, behind, to the left, to the right, above, below. In Colorado, at OHALAH, on planet Earth. And just notice what it feels like to be in this space. Be at this point in the cosmos. See if you can come as fully as you can into an embodied awareness of the space that you are in. Now I invite you to root yourself in time. So you could think of that as the point you are in the day, getting toward evening, the trajectory of a year, just past Hanukkah, somewhere in the journey of your life. Taking a moment to notice what it feels like to be at this point in time. And now I want to invite you to notice the dimension of being, of the nefesh, of the you that you are at this place, at this time. Maybe just noticing how your body feels right now. What thoughts or feelings are moving through you. Some part of your core identity that you have access to. breathing into this you, this being that is you. And then taking a moment to notice divine presence in this, in whatever way that manifests to you. This is Me'on Kodsho, this place of being, this intersection of being, space, and time is a holy dwelling. Noticing what it feels like to be in awareness of that dwelling. Taking a breath. And when you're ready, opening your eyes. It would be nice to hear from a few folks about if anything feels different. Yeah.
Thank you, Rabbi Joe. I felt connected to the core of Mother Earth. She was burning inside me, like the sna and an OHALAH. So I was burning with her. She's in me. It's not burning up even when I died of this body. And to remind us of Reb Gershon Winkler's wonderful teaching, the earth is our Merkava, passing through the universe at 26,000 miles an hour, which is an abstraction anyway, but Reb Winkler taught us that we're moving, and that is the Merkava, and our bodies are connected to that Merkava. So I want to thank you for reintroducing the Sefer Yetzirah to us so beautifully, and generating the fire in us that continues to teach Torah in all of us. That never-ending fire in us that will not go out when we pass from our bodies.
Thank you. What else arises here?
A deep softness, just a gentle, deep softness.
Yes.
It was similarly just a real restful, resting in the divine. When you asked us then to feel God's presence, it was just very comforting and enveloping.
I feel a shift in the potent field that we're living in. Kind of more what I think of Shekhinah presence being more palpable.
Sense of connectedness. The sense of that all of us are part of something much bigger.
I love that. That reminds me of the kind of ecosystem that we've been talking about.
Yeah, I had a similar thing come up for me, which is just look how many beautiful temples there are. And maybe it's all part of one, one big temple.
There's a passage in Sefer Yetzirah that says that 2 stones build 2 houses, and 3 stones build 6 houses, and then go out and calculate until infinity. And it's like each of us, right? It's basically saying what you said, right? That there are infinite temples, and they all proceed toward the one.
Beautiful.
You invited us to find a comfortable place, and I decided to lie down with my feet up, and then you had us in both directions.
And I was just aware that for me, up at that point was my feet in this direction and down my back. I mean, southwest, north, like I got all of that, but what a mind orientation and thinking about that nefesh and self, you know, there isn't really an east, west, north. I mean, it's so contingent on where I am. And it got turned upside down.
That's the rub of it.
Shuv l'makom,
Right.
I felt my own rest of Bashov.
Say more?
I mean, I felt all the dimensions that you were bringing in, and then I also felt the part that like goes into like the ratzo, like going out, and then coming back to that center and that connection.
So this is just like a little, oh yes, please.
So this isn't what happened during, but right when I came back, all of a sudden I started thinking of just the sounds of makom and omek, and realized that they're
So we have 3 more minutes, and I would really like to do one more practice with you, and this is the bedtime practice. I did with my daughter, and what I often do for myself when I'm on the subway and the subway's not moving, I'm anxious. Which I'm sure never happens to anyone. So the 3 mothers, according to Sefer Yetzirah, dwell in the chest, the aleph in the chest, and also in the middle world. The shin dwells in the head, in the sky, and the mem in the belly, right? So we in our bodies encompass these 3 elements. So just inviting you to close your eyes for a moment or soften your gaze. And breathing in, I invite you to breathe in the aleph. You can imagine the shape of the aleph or the sound of the aleph. Breathe out ah, or just the silence of the aleph. And feel the power of the air in the chest, the lungs, and the heart. Even imagine the aleph there inside. And on the next breath, breathing in the mem, the power of the water, the deep, the tahom, that goes into the belly. So this breath breathes out from the belly. Tahom rovetze tachat, the deep that are below. And on the next breath, breathing into the rosh, you can imagine the top of the head or even the keter point above the head. Shin, the fire, the spirit, the neurons. Breathing in the shin and breathing out. Feeling that power of fire in the rosh. We're now going to breathe them in succession. Aleph, Mem, Shin. Dropping the breath. Raising the breath to the highest point. always with us, and they are, as Sefer Yetzirah says, one of the deepest names for God. Thank you.
Thank you.
May this be a lifelong chavruta. And if you want the book, it's on the site of Ben Yehuda Press, or you can buy it on, all the places.